when you're hunting any field, one, are they going to be there during daylight when we're there? And then two, is there a buck in the area that's using that soybean field? I think there is.
Welcome back to another episode of some of our off-season content here. We're continuing our scouting videos here as we get closer to the season. This is another property we're going to dive into here. We don't have any of the facts right up front for us to give you acreage size, but we can pop those up on the screen. This is a kind of unique property in the sense that really it is just cornfield and marsh, really. There isn't a whole lot of other places that you can hunt. The surrounding properties are good, as you can tell from the map, but the property itself, the physical place that you can hunt, doesn't have a lot there. And I guess our thinking behind that was there's a lack of pressure there. We could find spots, deer coming to these food sources without having it attracting other people.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've been looking more and more into as we've done more and more public land stuff, is the spots that we think
out of the box
be
looking spots.
The spots we think there's not going to be other people, because we have such a problem with getting away from people on these small, pieces of public land here in Nebraska, and that's why we wanted to look at this property.
Yeah, and I think the food's there, as you can tell. We've got food there that the deer are coming in, and when we scouted it, there was tracks everywhere.
And we scouted, we should say, in like late January or early February, so it's just definitely a destination food source in the late season, which is another thing we're going to, obviously keep in mind as we move throughout the deer season.
And that was just telling us there was deer in the area and there was high enough deer population that you could sit there and see deer. We knew we were sitting on a food source, which is something that jumps out to us because most of the pieces of public we hunt don't have food sources that you can hunt. There's not food plots and food sources like this on the public that you can physically hunt. That's usually on the private, where in this case the food's on the public and the trees and the bedding are on the private. So we were just looking to see that there was deer here and that deer would be coming to this food source.
And usually we stay away, like you mentioned, stay away from the food sources. We just don't hunt them because we've tried, and then we'd say, oh, well, this might be an exception. And then
there's
we go
too
back.
Many people when we do.
Yeah, and it just doesn't ever work out. But this one's different. One of the things that it does have going for it is that all the trees that are like bordering the edge of it are all on private land. So you couldn't, they're cedar trees, they're too small to get a tree stand in anyways, but even if someone wanted to try, they're all on private land anyway. So none of this, the majority of this field, you can't even sit over unless you wanted to sit on the ground, which eliminates a bunch of people wanting to, because I think they're going to walk up and go, I can't even get in a tree, so what's the point?
Your setup has to be pretty unique too. There's that row of trees there, and we'll talk about that, is the only place like on the public where you can set up in a tree stand. Otherwise, you're going to have to get creative, set up on the ground. You mentioned things that has going for it. That marsh in the upper right there is also something that jumped out to us. That food and that marsh cover, as we've talked about plenty of times before, this is something that's important for us when we find that on a map. Provides a lot of cover, provides water in the early season, provides green browse for the deer. That's right next to, kind of creates a staging area right next to the, what's in there this year in soybeans. So that was something that jumped out to us too, is being able to use that marsh for cover, because like there wasn't bedding for woods there, but we knew there was bedding there for marsh, and that's something that maybe other people were overlooking as well.
And we've seen beds in there right away, because we went back to that marsh corner and walked the kind of property line there.
And it was frozen in the winter.
Yeah, there was trails. You could see them obviously a lot better than you can now in the summer, but there was trails going in and out, and there was beds. So then we're like, when there's tracks in the field, there's beds in this marsh. There's obviously deer on the surrounding areas. They're going to come to this area, so we think it's just and it wouldn't be a spot that if we seen other tree stands that we would probably hunt. But it was the fact also that we didn't see any other human activity, as far as at least when we scouted it, that we could tell that there was other people there, and that's what made it somewhat of an overlooked spot.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing for this one. It's just an overlooked spot, a spot that, if you know kind of what you're looking for, and you can kind of pick out some of those things that, hey, deer are still going to be here, and you pair that with the scouting that you've seen, you saw the tracks, you saw the trails, you saw the food source, you know that deer are still there. Just because it doesn't have the woods and the bedding on it doesn't mean there's not going to be deer there during the year. And I think we went back in the spring and you didn't see the sign, but we knew that sign was there in the winter because of how easy it is to see. And we have a trail cam up on there. I think we'll check that this weekend maybe. And do some velvet scouting tomorrow actually on this piece. So if we get anything good there, I'll just throw that up on the screen and overlay it over some of this if there's some big bucks on there or some velvet deer running around. So it's going to be an interesting spot. That food source is key, soybeans. So early season water in that marsh, early season setups, You want to talk about maybe where we're going to set up and start with at least?
Yeah, so we mentioned that none of the trees on that one side you couldn't get into. They're all
You
on
could do a
private.
ground setup if you had to, if you see them coming out.
The cedar trees overlap, obviously, and go through the barbed wire fence. So you could set up, if they're coming out in a certain spot, you could set up just right along that fence line and still be in the cedar trees and do a ground setup, but not something that we're confident enough in that I want to try straight off the bat without knowing more information first. I don't want to get busted my first time in because I sat in the wrong spot, type of a deal. So with that being said, there's only cottonwood trees in one little section on the northern side that borders the field on one side, little cottonwood little draw, and then there's grass, a strip of grass maybe, 50, 75 yards, and then there's a property line on the north side. So that is the only place we can get set up, and they're giant cottonwood trees, like huge. They've been there since the 1800s, cottonwood trees that are as big as this table that we're going to try to get a stand in. We think we found a spot that's going to work, and it's probably the only tree you could get a stand in.
Yeah, and so where we put the trail camera, there's just a trail coming off the private bedding on the backside. They're jumping the fence, walking right down through that draw, and kind of coming out in the middle of that cottonwood tree draw there that we're set up in, and then headed out to the beans. We can see, back onto the private if they happen to be sneaking around you somewhere over there. We can see the whole marsh and pretty much the whole field. So we get set up in there. The wind's the tricky thing for that spot and trying to figure that out, but it pretty much gives us a shot at the field edge, the path they're walking. That trail camera will tell us if stuff's moving through there. We can see the marsh too if they're bedding out there in that marsh.
It's just your typical bedding to feed setup, essentially.
Yeah, food source setup.
There is nothing special about it other than we've seen that really good trail coming out of the private that we got the trail camera up, which will hopefully give us some more information. We can shoot the field. Like you said, we can shoot the trail. It's pretty simple. It's just going to be sitting there, seeing if that's the right spot to be in, which hopefully it is, because it's going to be hard to move anywhere else based on the fact that there's hardly any other trees that we could get in. Anything else is going to be a ground setup.
Yeah.
Has to be.
And I think, like you said, it's pretty simple. I think the thing about this spot that could make it potentially really good is the fact that no one else is hunting it. You look at a map, you overlook it, you think it's just field, there's no trees, there's just a marsh there. It's nothing because I can't set up anywhere. It might be getting overlooked. The deer, if they're not eating in those other draws and those trees that you see surrounding it, they're going to go out there to those beans on our side. Hopefully they're coming out there, like we said, nobody else is there. They're still coming out to that food source. Pretty much that oddball overlooked spot, I think, is what this one has going for it. The setup and that kind of stuff is simple. It's that it's different.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're going to say Velvet Scout it probably tomorrow. Hopefully, we'd feel a whole lot better about it if we see something tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it's soybeans this year, so hopefully we see some deer out there tomorrow or get something on that trail camera just to help us. And that's just the other thing, too. When you're hunting any field, one, are they going to be there during daylight when we're there? Obviously, probably can't hunt it in the morning because we have to access, just based on how we have to access. It's going to be hard to hunt in the morning outside of like maybe the rut when the soybeans are gone and you just want to go sit in that cottonwood draw and see if you can't catch a buck cruising down that fence line, going from the marsh down the fence line into the other trees. And then two, is there a buck in the area that's using that soybean field? I think there is. We have, we've seen the tracks.
Deer numbers are high enough. There'll be something moving around.
There's got to be something using it. And we're not going to we will still probably hunt this regardless of what we get on trail camera and regardless of what we see. So maybe it won't be the first place we go early in September because we have a couple other spots we think are going to be pretty good. It might be we might not get there till October till they start cruising, but it's definitely a spot we're going to keep going back to. Like you said, I think deer numbers are too high. There's good deer in the area that we can go and sit there and just figure it out. And I don't think it's going to take too long to figure out because where we're sitting, we can see it's a great observation and kill tree all in the same thing. The key is just nobody else hunting it.
Yeah.
If there's anybody else hunting it, we're just probably going to have to move on. Essentially,
it's outside not big enough for more
outside of if
two
someone's
people
hunting it in November for a week or something, you know. But we didn't see any other stands, and there would have to be anything that told us there's anybody else down there at any point in time.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be an interesting one to see, but I think it'll be good. I know there's bucks in the area just from looking at it.
Our Velvet Scout here coming up will be the first time we've ever done any type of hunting on there to see live deer moving around, but I think I think they'll be there, whether it's bucks or does, I don't know. I think, like I said, the deer numbers are too high. Every time I've driven down there, I tried to turkey hunt down in there. It was bumping deer off other properties running across the road. So deer numbers are high enough to see something. It's just, seeing where it goes from there.
At the risk of jinxing us tomorrow, I don't think there's any way we don't see something tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't know that it'll be a buck, but I don't think there's any way we don't see something come to that field.
Yep, I agree. So kind of an interesting spot, an off-the-wall spot. Kind of the theme of all of these is probably really off-the-wall, different spots, going out on a limb. If you don't, as Dan Infalt says, date the fat chick, then you don't ever know. So that's kind of what we're doing here. Off-the-wall spots that maybe we wouldn't normally go to. We're going out on a limb, we're going to them, and we're seeing what happens. So if you got any questions about this setup or any of the other scouting videos, drop them below. As always, check out the Out Here show on that different channel. We'll link to that below. They come out every Monday. We'll talk about all kinds of different things related to the outdoor industry and the hunting industry. So be sure to check that out as well. Tune back in here for some more scouting videos, some more velvet scouting content, which we'll have coming up, and the season will be here before you know it. Thanks for watching.